Okay, in this tutorial I'm going to talk about managing your Cisco router and backing up your configuration file. You can see I'm using Packet Tracer here, and I've changed the configuration of the network here. We've got a router. The router's IP address on its Ethernet interface is 192.168.1.1. I've got a PC here that's consoled into the router. I've also got telnet abilities with this PC to get into the router. And I've got a switch here. And also I have a server, so I've put a server on 192.168.1.254, and the server is running TFTP. It is a TFTP server. It is running that program, and so having a TFTP server on this server, what we can do is we can back up our configuration file from the router to the TFTP server. A little just about TFTP, it runs on port 69, uses the UDP protocol. Basically, when you run a TFTP server, you want to check which folder or directory are the files going to be located, so where you can back your files up to. And you also want to make sure that you have your firewall, you check your firewall, making sure that the ports are open on port 69 so that you can talk to your TFTP server. Now, once again, this is a virtual environment using Packet Tracer, so I can click on this server and I can go to Config and I can go to TFTP, and you can see that you just simply turn it on or off, and then here are some bin files in here, and these are the IOSs, the Cisco operating systems for a bunch of different devices just sitting here in the directory that holds the TFTP that TFTP server points to. Right now, in reality, if you wanted to back up your configuration file or your iOS, your operating system, to a TFTP server, all you would have to do is basically run a TFTP server on some computer. So I have SolarWinds here that I'm about to install, SolarWinds TFTP server, and I'm just going to install it right here just to show you how it works. So I'll just click Next, and I'll accept the license agreement and hit Next, and I'm just going to hit the defaults here. And notice, let's get it running. We'll run the install. So this is a free TFTP server that you can download from the SolarWinds website. Okay, so it's installed. I'll hit Finish. Okay, and now I can run the server. So you'll see here, just to show you a little bit about how it works. Okay, here's the server. Just open this up a little bit more. Okay, so here's the SolarWinds server. We'll say File Configure. We'll take a look at it. Very simply, you can start and stop it here. Right now it's stopped. It's got a tray icon in the system tray, which is off screen right now. You can't see that. And then storage, you can see that everything is stored here in the C directory in a folder called TFTP-root, right? So we can browse to that folder, right? And we could check that folder out, but basically it doesn't have anything in it. Server bindings, what IP addresses is it going to bind to? Right? All IP addresses are just a single IP address because it's a server. It's going to be listening on certain IP addresses. And transfer types, send and receive files, or you could just send or just receive. And you can put some IP address restrictions here. So it's actually pretty simple, right? And that's it. Okay, so just a very simple protocol. Okay, so you can see here that I've started the TFTP server just on this computer, and so now what I could do is I can open a command prompt and I will run a netstat-a for all, and then P, and then I'll look for UDP ports, and I will find if we're listening on port 69. Alright, and let's see here. And sure enough, you can see here, picked up the 69 here and the 69 over here, but we're listening on 0000, right? So we're listening on all IP addresses here for port 69, so the TFTP server has started. So anyway, that's how you would run a TFTP server, let's say on your local computer, so that your actual physical router could you could back up your configuration file or your iOS to an actual TFTP server. But I'll stop that, and now what we'll do is we'll just run this virtually. I'll shut this down, and we'll bring up Packet Tracer, and we'll run this, and we will do this virtually through Packet Tracer. Okay, so let's console into our router. So I'll open up this PC, let's say, and I'll get a terminal connection. Since I have a console connection, I'll click OK, and now I have a console connection. I'll put in my password, and then I'll type enable to get to privileged mode. I'll put in the password again. Now I'm in privileged mode, and what I can do is I can say copy, right, and I'll say copy startup dash config space TFTP, and I'll hit enter, and it'll ask me for the address of the remote host. Well, I know that my TFTP server is sitting here at 1.254, 192.168.1.254, so I'll just type that in there, 192.168.1.254, hit enter, and the destination file name, it says r1-config. That sounds fine, so I'll just hit enter, and there it goes. It's writing the startup configuration file. It gives me a message that it worked, and so now what I can do is I can just open up this little server here, and we can see if it's in there, right? So we'll just take a look here. We'll go off screen and then back to the screen, and we'll see if it shows up in here. And there it is at the bottom. r1-config has been copied to the TFTP server. And so what I did is I copied the startup config file from my router through a console connection through this PC, consoled into the router, and then copied the configuration file from the router to the TFTP server. And that's what we see right here. Let's try to copy our iOS, our operating system, over there too, and back up our operating system over to the TFTP server also. So what I'm going to do is I'll do a show version, and in the show version command, the show command, you can see here that this is the name of the operating system file, right? pt1000-i-mz.122-28.bin. It's a bin file, and it's in flash memory. So let's see if we can get that going. So I'll say copy. I'm going to say flash to TFTP. Copy flash memory to TFTP. Say enter, and it'll ask me for the source file name. So I'll say file name pt1000-i-mz dot 122 -28 dot bin. Okay, address of remote host. Alright, hit enter. And do I want the same name for the file? Just to make sure that there's already a file probably with this name in there. So I'm going to change the name. So I'll say Dan's pt1000 .bin. Alright, Dan's pt1000 .bin, and hit enter, and there it goes. It's copying. Notice the exclamation points. Looks like it worked. Now let's go over to the server and see if it worked. So we go over to the server, click here to open. We'll look down here at the bottom, and there it is, Dan's pt1000 .bin. So we backed up the iOS, the operating system, the Cisco operating system, to the TFTP server virtually using Packet Tracer, which would be the same exact commands basically if we were doing it on an actual router. Okay, let's look at a even better way to restore a configuration file. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have a configuration file on my router. I've just done a show run command. I'm in privileged exec mode, and you can see here that I have my configuration file, right? Okay, well, what I want to do is I'm going to copy this file. So I'll just copy all the text from the terminal, and I'm going to start copying it from hostname, where I've changed the hostname of the router, to dans-r1. So I'll just do that copy, right? And now I want to find a text editor, right? So let's see if they have a text editor that we can use. There's a text editor that we can use right here, and I'll just do File, or right-click and paste. And then I've just pasted my configuration into a text editor in Packet Tracer. It's a virtual text editor here. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change where it says banner in the message of the day. I'm going to change the characters to make them correct, as if I was issuing the command. Okay, so I'll change that back to 2 pound signs, and then under my Ethernet configuration, I'm preparing this to recover from a text file my my configuration. So with my Ethernet, what I'll do is after speed auto, I'll say no shutdown. Okay, I'm going to put in the no shutdown command into the text file. And then on my serial interface, which I've configured, you can see it here because it's got a description on it. It's got the IP address configured. I'm also going to type here no shutdown. So I've got no shutdown on the Ethernet, no shutdown on the serial. That looks good. Okay, up at the top it has host name. And if I wanted to, I could actually put extra configurations right in here if I wanted to. If I wanted to change, let's say, the password here of line console 0 from Cisco to, let's say, let's call it password. I don't recommend this. I'm just saying password. The name is, we'll call it Cisco Pass. How about that? Okay, so password is Cisco Pass. So I've just changed that, and I'll change this one too. All right. And if I wanted to, I could put in more commands, that kind of thing. All right, I'll save this, and I'll call it Dan's config 2. All right, so I've saved that file. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. All right, copy it, and I'm going to open up Notepad on my computer and paste it right into Notepad. All right, and you can see it's in there. All right, and the reason for this is this virtual text editor in Packet Tracer. It has formatting or markup in the text, and it doesn't allow you to copy the text cleanly and paste it into the router. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to paste it right into the router. So I'm going to highlight all of this again and do a Control-C to copy. And now, from the router, let's connect to our router. And what we'll do is we'll erase the startup config. So our configuration file will be erased, and then we'll reload the router. All right, so we're reloading the router, and we should be met with a router with no configuration. Okay, I'll hit no for the system configuration dialog wizard. Hit return to enter, and you can see that the router's host name for the router name has changed from Dan's router to just back to router, the default, and there's no password, right? If I type enable and do a show run, the configuration is gone, right? Configuration's gone. So what I'll do is I'll do a configure terminal, and then what I'll do is I'll just paste my configuration right into the terminal, and you can see it pastes right into the global config mode terminal, and you can see as it's pasted in directly, as soon as, this is pretty cool, as soon as it was pasted in, you could see that the serial interface changed to up automatically, and the Ethernet interface changed to up as soon as it was pasted in. Why? Because I actually put in my text editor the no shutdown text, so that it pastes in just like as if I was entering the commands. So as soon as it's put in, everything goes up, and all I have to do now is do a copy run tab, running config to sta tab startup config, and now I've recovered my configuration file from a text file back into the router. And of course this is done virtually through Packet Tracer, but you can do the same thing on an actual router through PuTTY or Hyperterminal or something like that. Okay, in a previous video I talked about backing up your config file and your iOS, your operating system, your router's operating system and your router's config file to a TFTP server. And so in this Packet Tracer scenario, I've got a router here, I've got some small configurations on it, some interfaces are configured and some things like that. And I backed up the configuration file and the iOS to this server over here at 1.254. And if I click on the server and I click on TFTP to look at the TFTP server, you can see that if I scroll down, there's Dan's config right here and Dan's iOS. So I successfully backed up my config file and my iOS to the TFTP server. I'll show you the command for that again when we get into the router. Also, I've got a PC here that has a console connection to the router. So now I'm going to show you how to restore a configuration file to your router, and I'll show you a couple ways to do that. All right. So first thing, we're going to console into the router from our PC, let's say. And so we'll console in. I'll go to desktop, terminal, the default settings. This is emulating a terminal connection like from PuTTY or Hyperterminal. And I'll click OK. And I'm in the router. Let's exit the router so we start with a fresh. Okay, so there we go. I met with a presentation screen here, and I'll hit enter. I've got a banner message of the day here, warning no unauthorized access. I got to put in my password, Cisco. I'll type enable. Now I'm in privileged user mode, and I can look at the running configuration, do a show run, and you can see here I've got host name is router. I've just got my Ethernet interface configured with a description on it. I've got my serial 2 interface configured with a description on it. I've also got the banner message of the day, and I have line console 0 configured with a password and login, and I've got line VTY virtual terminal for telnet configured with a password and a login, right? So so now if I wanted to, let's say, back up my configuration file or my iOS to the TFTP server, it would be a command like this. Copy, let's say, start tab, startup config to TFTP, right? And I would hit enter, and I'd put in the IP address of the remote host. All right. And the destination file name, I'd say Dan's dash config, and it's done, right? And if I want to do the same thing for my iOS, I would say copy flash memory to the TFTP server. Now with this one, I have to have the name, the file name of my iOS to do this. So that's the trick with that one. So before I would do that, I would do a show version. I've got the bin file right here for my iOS. If after I do a show version command, in the output you'll see the name of your iOS right there. So I could copy this file right here over. So I'll just do that really quickly just to show you. Copy flash memory to TFTP, and then it asks you for the file name. So that's where you'd put that in, pt1000-i-mz.122 28.bin, and then the destination host IP address, and destination file name. I could say it Dan's, once again, iOS, and there we go, and it's successfully. So what if you wanted to restore, though? That's the other question. So if you wanted to restore, I'll show you a couple of methods for restoring your configuration file, and it's pretty easy. Basically what you would do is, instead of saying copy from the startup config to the TFTP server, you'd say copy TFTP to running config, right, like that. Or you could say copy TFTP to startup dash config, right? So let's do that. Okay, so we'll do that. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to erase my startup configuration file and reload my router so that there's no configuration. So I'll say erase tab startup config, right? It gives me a warning. Do you sure you want to do that? Yes. All right, I just erased my startup config. I'll reload the router, press reload, hit enter, and now it's going to reload the router or restart the router, and you'll see that there'll be no configuration file now. Okay. Configure with configuration dialog, I'll say no. All right, and now I have a brand new router. As you can see, I did not have a login password. If I type enable and do a show run, I don't have, my interfaces are not configured, and I lost my banner message of the day, and my line console 0 and my line VTY my telnet line is not configured either. So I've lost my configuration. So how would we do that? How would we get our configuration back? Well, we would just say copy TFTP, right, to, let's do running configuration, address of remote host, source file name, dans-config, destination file running config, and it's probably not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is we don't have any interfaces configured, and so it's trying to grab the TFTP, it's trying to grab the file from the TFTP server at 1.254, but we have down interfaces here. So that's not going to work. So for this configuration to work, I'm going to do a Control-Shift-6 to get out. I'm going to have to first configure my interface on fast Ethernet. So configure terminal. I'm going to say INT, short for interface, FA, short for fast Ethernet, 0/0, goes into interface configuration mode, IP address, and put in the IP address and the subnet mask. Okay, and then a no shut, which is short for no shutdown, and now it's up. So now I can do a Control-C, and now I can do copy TFTP from the TFTP server to the running configuration file, and the address of the remote host, and the file name, and I'll hit enter, the destination, and it should work now. Okay, it looks like it was copied. So now I can do a show run, and you can see now there's my configuration. It's all nice, brand new. There's my banner message of the day that came back, and there's my passwords for my line console 0, my line VTY 0 through 4. And so last thing I need to do is save this, because if I reload the router, it'll be gone. So I'll say copy run, which is short for running -config, to start, which is short for startup -config, and save the file, hit enter, take the default, and I've just restored my configuration file.